Sanzai talked about at lunch, and he ended by saying that the problem of people, especially youth, being recruited and susceptible to radicalization is a problem that needs to be discussed within the Muslim community and within the community as a whole. And we always say that, you know, information is the first step toward trying to solve a problem. So what this is about is just sort of an awareness briefing on kind of what we're seeing, what the issues are from our perspective. So, okay, so.
As parents, we feel.
So I'm gonna, so this video, let me just tell you what this is that I start with. This is the mother of a woman, the mother of a man who was arrested at the airport in Chicago on his way to the Middle East to join a terrorist group. And the way this came about is, from the parents' perspective, they had no idea. They got a knock on their door one morning, and there were some FBI agents standing there, said, wanted to talk to them about their children. They said, sure, they're right upstairs, we'll go up and get them. Well, of course, they weren't upstairs. They were at the airport, and their son had already been arrested by the FBI. And not only was the son there in the custody of the FBI, he had brought the younger son and the younger daughter, who were like age 16 and 17 or something like that, to the airport. And all three of them were trying to get on a plane to fly to the Middle East to join a terrorist group, and the parents had no idea. And this is outside the courthouse after the arraignment of the older son. So that's just to give a sense of, and a lot of parents have experienced what this grieving mother is, have no idea what's going on, as surprised as anybody that their children should be caught up in this kind of thing. So how does this happen? And as the speaker at lunch said, there are many, many different reasons. It's hard to identify, it's hard to point to any particular reason, and there's a long history of people being radicalized to all kinds of extremist causes. Putting aside ISIS and all that stuff, this goes back, you know, in history, whether it's neo-Nazi groups or the IRA or whatever it is, extremist violent groups have always throughout history tried to recruit people, and a lot of the same sort of psychological and socioeconomic factors sort of come into play all the time. So all types of violent extremism groups, white supremacist groups, anti-government extremists, and Middle Eastern terrorist groups all have sort of some things that are similar in the way that they operate. Oh, I'm going backwards again. And one of the things that we have learned, sadly, is that lately, one of the things that is very much on the minds of a lot of people, particularly in this community, is that there are terrorist groups in the Middle East who have been able to recruit people, and sadly, there are a very few, but there are people out there who do get seduced by that. And we saw that, of course, in San Bernardino shooting, which is what people are very conscious about here. These are pictures from the Tsarnaev brothers in the Boston Marathon. And these are, those examples are particularly shocking to those of us here in the United States, because as the speaker said at lunchtime, generally the Muslim communities here in the United States are quite well integrated, they're moderate, they're mainstream, and so the fact that there are a few individuals out there who can be seduced into committing acts of violent terrorism is quite shocking, and trying to figure out why this happens is the first step to trying to counteract it. Oops, going backwards again. Okay. So this is an important point, which is that Al-Qaeda and ISIS, there's no profile for this. And people who have been recruited to join terrorist organizations come from all different socioeconomic backgrounds, rich and poor, all racial backgrounds, black, white, all different colors, native-born populations, foreign-born populations, families that are more religious, families that are less religious. There's no profile. You cannot stereotype, you can't profile, you can't predict based on someone's family or their religion or their education level or their income level who might be susceptible to this. It just doesn't work that way. It's not that simple. And so the first thing we have to do to be effective is to get rid of stereotypes and get rid of preconceived notions about it, and just recognize that it's a vulnerability that can happen anytime, anywhere, to anybody if the right factors come into play. Oop, there I go again. So one of the things that's true about all extremist groups, and I've been a prosecutor for many years. I've prosecuted right-wing extremists, anti-abortion, domestic terrorists who were attacking clinics, and a lot of them do have some factors in common. And when they're recruiting people, there are some things that they have in common. They look for vulnerabilities. They try to focus on grievances. They talk about, they try to provide a community of interest. I know the speaker at lunch was saying that some of the things that are motivators is that inclusiveness thing. It's the same thing about people who join a gang. So often they want inclusion. They feel isolated from their parents, from their friends, from their school, from the government, and they want a sense of belonging. They want to belong to a group that loves them, and so that's often an interesting thing. And what is different about modern terrorist groups is sometimes that belonging, that group, is online. They're not even people that they've ever met before. They're people in other countries or other states, or people that they're communicating with online. And that's what's different about this generation, is people make friends, and they often think they're very close friends with people they've never met. They only know them through their iPhone. Generally, these groups promote violent action as a solution, and they tend to hold a black and white narrative of events. That is, to motivate people to action, you try to portray one side as good, the other side as evil. We're on the side of good. We are fighting everything that is corrupt and evil and bad, and it takes violence to do that, so you should join us and be violent. And that's true not just of modern terrorist groups. It was true of the IRA. It was true of white supremacist groups, neo-Nazis. They all try to promote this sort of sense: we are the few, the pure, and we are fighting evil and corruption, and violence is the way to do it. So in the Muslim community, in terms of the modern terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, typically the general discussion starts with that Muslims are being targeted by the United States. The United States has brought ruin and disgrace to Islam, and that Muslims are a target of aggression, and that therefore the United States and Islam are at war, and therefore only violence, you have to stand up for the faith by engaging in violence. And it's this kind of progression of us versus them mentality, which plays out over and over again. And again, in lots of different ways, lots of different people. The message is, tailored for individuals, but this is sort of a common theme. Okay, so different factors that may be involved. And this was something which, again, the speaker at lunch mentioned, that there were like about 9 different factors that if you look at. The complicated thing is there are usually mixed factors, many different mixed factors, and they overlay in different ways in different situations depending on who the person is. So there could be personal level factors, psychological issues, or issues with the personal history of somebody. Could be then there are group level factors, including relationships with family members around them, with their older brother maybe isn't influencing, or maybe they're reacting against their mother or their father. Community level factors depends on, do they feel part of the community, do they not? Are there people who are a negative influence in the community? And again, this could be an online community, not necessarily a geographic community. Larger sociological, socio-political issues, grievances about politics in the Middle East, or about government policy, what have you. And then ideological factors, which could be people influencing them through ideology, which could be religion-based, it could be other things, talking about how they have to defend the faith or whatever it is. But all of these different factors, many people have some of these factors going on in their lives. They're angry at their father. They are upset about the way people are treating their religion. They are upset about community level factors. They feel isolated from law enforcement or whoever. So there are a lot of these different factors that are at work. The confusing thing, and why it's so hard to predict, is these come together in different ways with different people. So let's see. So as I said, there's no single factor that leads to radicalization. Can be lots of these sort of factors. So in the recent history of Middle Eastern terrorist groups recruiting people, a few years ago, back in the old days, it was a very different sort of system of recruiting and vulnerabilities. It tended to be that in al-Shabaab and in al-Qaeda before that, they were very careful about grooming young people, identifying people who were vulnerable, spending a lot of time kind of recruiting them, seeing if they could trust them, testing them, and then recruiting them to go overseas. And there have been quite a number of people who went overseas for that purpose. But it's become quite different in recent years. So these are some of the more recent examples of people who have gone overseas. Again, from all walks of life, mostly young people. That is one profile that is fairly consistent. As the speaker said, they tend to have between the ages of about 16 and 30. Not universal, but they tend to be young people. But other than that, from all over the place, all different types of backgrounds. And of course, what they're going to is a very brutal situation over in Iraq or in Syria. A lot of, obviously, a lot of violence. A very, very brutal situation, but that's not the way that it's depicted when they go over there, especially the younger they are, and especially younger girls, and I'll talk about that in a moment. That is an increasing trend, is young women going over there, thinking they're going to sort of a paradise of, brotherhood and collegiality and joining a community, and this is not what they see. That what's presented to them is very different, and of course the experience is quite different when they get over here. So as I mentioned, this is these are all young people, all under the age of 18, who have all gone to join ISIS. These folks are primarily Europeans who left from Europe, but the same thing has been going on in the United States. Some of these, I think the two girls who are, I think, of Bosnian background went over there, and there was some word I had heard about they had gotten over there and that they had tried to come back, but were unable to leave. The two girls in the corner down there, you may have read about, they were young girls that left from Britain. Again, sort of like the situation that we started with the video. Parents had no idea. They disappeared, and the only reason they knew that they went is later the police found the video from Heathrow Airport of them getting on a plane, the two of them, and flying to the Middle East. As I mentioned, there's been quite an evolution in the way this works, and part of it is the content of it. ISIS has gotten much more internet savvy than previous groups. They are very, very effective and very slick about their messaging. Very aggressive about using social media, and unlike what I was saying earlier about al-Qaeda and al-Shabaab and all these groups who carefully sort of try to recruit individuals, ISIS has a very different approach. They just flood the social media with messages. They just send out, they and their supporters and sympathizers send out tens of thousands of messages every day on all kinds of different platforms. They don't really care who's getting it, if it's law enforcement, if it's somebody who supports them, who doesn't. They just don't care. They're a little bit more like the spam approach that was talked about this morning with the internet. They just flood, and if you get 1% of the people to sort of click or to respond, that's a win for them. That's a win. It costs them nothing. So they have sort of an internet marketing philosophy about this, very different from what used to be the case with other terrorist organizations. And they use Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Kik, WhatsApp. I mean, some of these things, which I wouldn't even know where to find it, but your 15-year-old probably has some of these on their phone, and there are terrorist groups that can reach right into your kid's phone and talk to them through those. So it's pretty scary, and there are new apps that are, as was said this morning, about every 6 months there seems to be some new sort of social media way of communicating, and it's not just other, ninth graders that are on that. This is one, again, 40,000 tweets a day by ISIS through this one app. Okay, so if you're a teenager and you want to go join a terrorist group in the Middle East, you've already been radicalized, you're not going to tell your parents, you can go right online and find instructions on what to do, where to go. They'll tell you how, what to bring, what kind of shoes, where to go, what towns to go to in Turkey. You can find it all. It's like a roadmap to how to get from whatever suburban place you are in the United States to a place in Turkey where someone will meet you and get you across the border. This is a young woman, again, grew up in the suburbs of Birmingham. Her father immigrated here 20 years ago from Yemen, very successful. She was a student at the University of Alabama, a business student. Everyone thought that she was doing very well, very successful, no problems in school. but she was apparently contacted over ISIS, over Twitter by ISIS, and she, in November 2014, fled and went off to ISIS and is still over there as far as we know. She has not been heard from for a long time. Don't even know if she's alive anymore. But her father is quoted saying, I believe she's been brainwashed. She's not that kind of girl. They brainwashed her. So it's just one of those things. Unfortunately, as was said this morning about the internet and apps and all that thing, it's a big generational divide. There's a whole world of communication going on in a younger generation. Parents have no idea. They're not into it. They don't use it. They don't follow it. They don't really know what's going on. And that can create this kind of a gap when younger people are having this whole conversation with groups in the Middle East that don't really have their interests at heart. And you know, brainwashing is kind of an old-fashioned term, but they can seduce people into thinking they are going and joining a pure, wonderful thing. They're standing up for their religion. Everything in the West is corrupt and bad. And when they're young and impressionable and they spend a lot of time communicating and it sort of gets reinforced to them all the time, that can happen. So I'm going to finish with this story. Mona Abu Salah, who was from Florida, grew up in a gated community, in a suburban community in Florida, was very popular, everyone very outgoing, loved to play basketball, dropped out of college, went to the Middle East, and in 2014 drove a truck bomb into a restaurant in Syria, age 22, blew himself up and killed a number of Syrian soldiers. And this was his kind of farewell video. So that was part of his last words. The next day, drove that truck bomb into a restaurant and was killed. So, and again, throughout his video, he's saying a lot of the things that I started with. Everything is black and white. We are the small group of the pure. Everything else is evil. Everything else is bad. The only solution is violence. I am a hero. I am here with my brothers. So this is the kind of philosophy that people can be susceptible to. And again, my point is just to alert people to kind of what's going on. This is what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of it. We see it right here in California. It's more common than you would think. Fortunately, not nearly as many people have gone over to the Middle East from the United States as has from Europe, but there are a lot, for every one person that goes on over, there are a lot more who are thinking about it, who have gotten this information, who are weighing and thinking about it. And a lot of, I think, counteracting this is getting people outside the bubble and the sort of echo chamber of the internet and talking to other people, you know, getting involved in things, making sure that their life isn't just black and white, just good versus evil, and more engaged with the surrounding community and not just with their online community. So what I was trying to stress is how ISIS, in many ways, they're using new technology, but age-old sort of a way of seducing people. But their particular sort of warped ideology is one of the things that's so scary about it is what we used to call a millenarian, end of times sort of philosophy, and they are trying to get the military, the Western forces to come into the Middle East because they believe that there's going to be an Armageddon, there's going to be an end-of-time battle between good and evil, and there will be a few survivors. So in some ways, they're like a giant death cult, and they are persuading people that the heroic thing to do is to go lose your life in this, or if you're a girl, to go over and marry a fighter and be part of the struggle. So it's hard to reason with a group like that. One of the reasons, I can't get too political, but one of the things that I am concerned about is that the very negative sort of tenor of some of the discussion about the Muslim community, as the president has said, and as other people have said, reinforces this view that it's a war between Islam and the West, and that the United States is against us, and therefore, they'll never accept us. We're not Americans. We're not part of the society. They're against us. We have to take action. So it's, again, the number of people that are being radicalized to violence is very, very small, but we don't know where this is going to go from here, and certainly the atmosphere, the overall atmosphere in this country and in Europe, in some other countries, is very unproductive. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think, this is just my own theory about this, but when I grew up, and as people know, I spent some time growing up in Lebanon, very close to the Palestinian struggle, and I went to school with Palestinians and visited the camps and all that stuff. And in the 70s and 80s, so much about the Middle East was about Palestine, and it was about the fight in Palestine, and the narrative was about national liberation. That was what was. But today, to the younger generation, not if you're Palestinian, but to most people, that is not what this is about anymore. It's a cosmic sort of death cult about, you know, the end of times, and Palestine doesn't figure very much in that, I don't think, in this kind of activity. I just don't think in the ISIS Twitter and stuff that's going back and forth, they're not talking about Palestine. That's one small thing about, you know, how Muslims are being oppressed, but it's not based on that. The way, you know, so much about the Middle East was about that, but it's not so much anymore, I don't think. In terms of what we're doing, aside from the national security, aside from investigating and trying to prevent acts of terrorism, one of the things that we're doing, and you know, one of the reasons we have events like this, is because we have an interest in countering this us versus them narrative, and we don't want us versus them. We all want to be part of one community. We want more Muslims in law enforcement, in government. We want people in the community to understand who we are, what we're doing, those sorts of things. And so one of the things that I think we can try to do, people in the Muslim community can do, but in law enforcement and government, is not necessarily, we're not trying to counter brainwash anybody. We're just trying to say, hey, let's look at reality. Let's try to engage with each other so that people don't get this false notion of hatred and division. But who knows if that'll be successful. Our general view, and I know there are people, ex-military people, going over and joining the Kurds. That's not a lawful activity. I mean, it is not legal in this country to be a private soldier of fortune signing up for foreign, you know, whether it's for money or for ideology or whatever. That is not legal. So across the board, so we had a very controversial prosecution in my office of people in the Hmong community who were planning to ship arms to their compatriots in Laos to try to fight against a very oppressive Laotian regime. And we charged those people, and we got a lot of criticism from the court. Why are we charging these people? They were our allies in the Vietnam War. They're fighting an oppressive regime. Well, we enforce the law. We do it impartially, and our view is, regardless of ideology, religion, whatever, that we shouldn't be doing that. Boko Haram has not had the focus on reaching people in the United States as effectively as ISIL has now. That may be changing. I know that same was true with al-Shabaab in Somalia. For a long time, al-Shabaab was viewed as that's a Somalia civil war problem, and then they started attacking people in Kenya and elsewhere, and Boko Haram had been looked at as this was a Nigeria problem, and then it was spreading to Cameroon and Chad and elsewhere. So ISIS has been much more, they are not a national movement. They're not a civil war. They are attracting people from all over the world, and as you were saying, their interest is in fighting everywhere, blowing everything up. And so in terms of the vulnerability of people in a place like Sacramento, our highest concern are groups like ISIS right now. But that's not to say that there aren't other groups like Boko Haram that are also very much of a concern. Despite what he tells you, Donald Trump is not part of the U.S. government, okay? He may want to be part of the U.S. government, but at least at the moment, he's not part of the U.S. government. And as President Obama has said, and many other people have said, that his message is not the message of the U.S. government. In fact, very much the opposite. And as the president made the point of, speaking in the mosque in Baltimore last month, and as we try to do collectively, is to try to push back on that. Now, one of the things about the United States, and I talk to people a lot about this, is we are First Amendment extremists in this country, and we give robust protections to free speech, even if it's Islamophobia, even if it's racist, if it's hatred, whatever. If it's not incitement to violence, the speech itself is not illegal. That's one of the reasons all of this solicitation over the internet by ISIS and all these groups are so difficult for us to deal with, is we can't just shut it off. We can't just close the border, close the internet. We believe in free speech. Even terrorist groups have free speech rights here. Everybody does. It's the violence that is dangerous. So from our perspective, what we can do is try to contribute our own speech back and try to speak to the press, try to counteract that with our own speech. And it's a continuous battle, and I'm not sure we're winning. We'll see where we're going.